Okay. Hey guys, this is John. Welcome to the show. I am very pleased to be here. This is my first live Chessable classroom experience, as I suspect it is for many of you in the chat, although I bet we're going to see some regulars as well who have maybe tuned in for some of the other Chessable classrooms with
Hi, John.
such luminaries as Svidler and Kramnik, all sorts of people. So, oh, hello. I see people in the classroom as we speak. I think it's going to fill up fast. Sways says, I'm so hyped. Great. Yeah, we'll get started here in just a minute. Shout out to the Twitch chat as well. If you're following us on the official Chessable channel on Twitch, it's just twitch.tv/Chessable if you happen to want to look at that chat. Hello, Tom Haas. Also, Race for the Prize says, will we ever see Scandi in a world championship final? Yeah, to be determined. Maybe we will at the end of this year. I think Magnus is more likely to play it than Nepo, but you never know.
Hi, John.
Hello, how's it going?
Good. I'm not. Should we keep my mics muted? Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. That's probably the easiest way to do it. I don't know if there's a protocol.
Yeah,
They didn't
sure.
actually mention that to me, but since I'll mostly be talking to the broadcast.
Yeah. I'll mute it.
Cool. All right. So yeah, we're just going to look through the games from today in the Chessable Masters. It is the semifinals. So we had the match Wesley So versus Vladislav Artemyev. And these are ongoing matches, by the way. There's still another round tomorrow, and then a tiebreaker if necessary. And then in the other match, we had like Kwang Liem versus Levon Aronian, and quite a bit of fighting chess today. So I'm going to skip around a little bit. I have briefly looked at the games, but I haven't done any sort of deep analysis. I haven't looked at any of this with the engine other than turning on the kind of weak Stockfish engine, you know, that's on like the broadcast. Like if you're following on Chess24 on your app, there's an engine, but it's mostly just to check things. So let's just take a quick cruise down some of these games. Okay, so this is Artemyev as white versus Wesley as black. And this, I think, was the second game that they played. The first game was a relatively quick draw, so I didn't think it was worth really touching on that one. It was some theory in the Tarrasch variation, I believe, and it kind of fizzled out quickly. And I think Artemyev took a draw in a position that the commentators were surprised that he did. This was the second game. One thing I've noticed about Artemyev, who is playing white here, he plays a lot of like quirky systems where the theoretical evaluation is not necessarily so favorable, but he understands the nuances quite well. And I know when I've researched random like D4 lines in the London, the Tory, the Kali, stuff like that, his name often pops up. So he has a pretty wide opening repertoire. And this just caught my eye, what he did against Wesley in this game. And Wesley, of course, is one of the best players in the world. Super fundamentally correct player, very solid player, very difficult to beat, needless to say, and doesn't take a whole lot of risks with his opening repertoire most of the times. Like he plays it pretty straight. So it's interesting to see Artemyev like throwing this G pawn down the board here and attacking the knight on F6. Wesley brought his knight back to G8. And now H4 from Artemyev, looking to play H5. Wesley plays bishop H5, just blocking that idea. Bishop E2, H6, C4, E6. Okay, some pawn play. We get a swap. And pretty soon, Artemyev made a pretty consequential decision. By the way, I'm going to be asking some questions to the audience today. And we're going to incorporate some giveaways as well as we go through this. So in this position, Artemyev played the rather committal move, knight d4. Okay, and this is the first time I've ever done this, but let's try out a little quiz here. If you guys are in the Chessable classroom, what would you play as black? And try to predict, I'd say, the next couple of moves. But you should be able to play it on your board. I'm going to set it for About a minute timer. And let's see. Actually, yeah, I'm going to set a couple of moves that you have to play here. All right. Should be engaged. Black to move. What is the correct two-move sequence in this position? All right, we got answers rolling in. A lot of wrong answers I see. You guys got to pick it up. Either that or I did the quiz wrong, but I think the quiz is correct. Oh, this is so cool from the coach's perspective in the classroom. I got to tell you guys, like I can see all your answers real time. Okay, there we go. So congratulations to those of you who had bishop takes e2, followed by h takes g5. That is the correct sequence. So if we go back to our notation here, yeah, Wesley took on e2, queen takes, and then took here. And due to the pin on the file here, white can't take back. And Artemiev, yeah, he's sacrificing a pawn, and he decided to sacrifice a second pawn coming up, actually. He starts developing knight c3, knight f6, castles, and then rook takes h4. And honestly, the game just became a mess from here. And for me to even attempt to say what's going on in this position, I think would be an overreach on my part because, yeah, these are the best players in the world, like working through a complicated position. If you're going to make a sacrifice like this as white, like needless to say, you got to play actively. You have to try to open lines. I do like the spirit of this e4 move, looking to create pressure against that black king sitting on e8. White gets a pawn back with check. So discovery on the king here. Queen trade was proposed by Wesley, knight d4. And yeah, again, from the little I saw, it looked like Wesley did a good job of stabilizing things. Getting the queens off the board when you're defending is a key defensive concept. I tell that to my students all the time. If you can trade queens, that instantly slows the pace of the game. And often as a default, just gives you a better chance of defending if you're under pressure. So I think that was an achievement. And I don't know if I'm going to highlight anything else here coming up, but we'll just play through the moves and kind of see the result. I'll give another little quiz for you guys. So in this position, black is still up a pawn. Okay, so one extra pawn for Wesley. He's got a couple double pawns, though. A little bit of an ugly structure. Now, he could play a pawn-grabbing move, right? So why don't we make this a giveaway, actually? I'm going to choose someone's answer, but let me make the quiz first. Do another minute timer. All right. So if black plays... Oh, wait. I did the quiz on the wrong move. If black plays... Let's just make this a chat one. If black plays rook takes f2, what would be white's answer? Okay, you guys are ready for that. Nice. It's a variation of the game, so I wasn't able to make it a quiz. There probably is a way, but yeah, that is correct. Bishop c7. So if black were to play this rook takes f2 move, they run into bishop c7. And the rook is in turn guarding the knight. And if the rook moves, yeah, that knight will drop off. So there are some tactical nuances there for sure. Wesley had to avoid that. But he played knight df6 instead, got his knight in the action. Makapaka, congratulations, by the way. You win either a mug, a shirt, or a Chessable course of your choosing. And I was told that you can choose pretty much any course you want. So, yeah, do get in touch. I'm sure the mods will get in touch with you. Yeah, the course. I don't know if previous classroom broadcasters have mentioned that, but Peter's Fiddler evidently gave away a lot of Chessable socks. So we don't have any socks to give away, but we have mugs, shirts, and the all valuable courses. So yeah, of course, Makapaka. Good job. There will be 3 other giveaways, so no worries, guys. Now Rook takes F2, Rook takes B7. It always seemed to me like Wesley was pressing here. Other pawn drops off, but now Rook B8. King takes on D2, getting rid of that annoying Rook. And now for sure, White's looking to eliminate this pawn on G2. Still very unbalanced. Yeah, it definitely looks like a copy bar. Yeah, it definitely looks like Wesley was still winning right around here. Look what happens. Bishop B2 attacking the knight, which is trying to hold that G2 pawn. And after this simplification, Artemiev was able to get it down to, again, just a 1-pawn deficit. And through some really tenacious defense, he eventually held this ending. Yeah, counter-attacking move right here. Interesting. Wesley's trying to trade knights. He keeps it, Artemiev keeps it out of a pure rook ending, rook and 2 versus rook and 1, and plays knight c3, offering to go into a knight ending instead. Is what happened. But knight endings are notoriously tricky. Poses a knight trade. If this happens, notice Black's king will be outside of the box of this white pawn. Right? Those of you who have studied endgame theory, maybe my 100 endgames course, tons of other resources will know this, but you can draw like a mental box here, and the Black king can't quite get into the box, even to the edge of it. So if something like this happens, Black's not going to be in time. So that's why he was able to offer a knight trade. Black didn't take him up on it. Further offering a knight trade, White's king would be close enough to stop the Black pawns, but again, Black can't say the same. White had just enough activity here to hold the position. Gave a check, picked up the F5 pawn. And these players soon repeated the position and agreed to draw. So yeah, saved by Artemiev for sure. I'm sure Wesley, I don't know if anyone in the chat knows what the evaluation was, but I'm sure Wesley was kicking himself. I actually happen to know Wesley, so he lives probably about 20 minutes away from where I live here in the state of Minnesota. And he sometimes shows up to local tournaments and stuff. Just super nice guy. He comes out and he supports the local community. So I always root for him. Just a great guy, and also a Chessable author too. But yeah, I'm sure he was kicking himself for this game. I think right around, let's say somewhere in this vicinity, especially if he could keep that G-pawn. If there was a way to keep that G-pawn, I think he pretty much has this game in the bag, and I would imagine the engine will just eat this position up, eat up White's defenses. Okay, let's go to another game. Okay, sticking with the same match. I think this is my favorite game, the one we're going to look at next. Favorite game of this round. How many of you guys have studied 100 endgames you must know, just out of curiosity? Okay. I see a couple people on video raising their hand, some people in the chat saying so. Cool. Yeah. Again, I'm biased because I did the videos for the course, but I really like it because it's just the 100 theoretically most important endings, or close to it, what the author of the course, which is Grandmaster Jesus de la Villa, what he considered to be the 100 theoretically most important endgames, and how to win them or draw them, depending upon what your goals are in the position. And there's some nice discussions of like how to arrange your pawns in certain endgames. The role of pawns in general. A lot of endgame theory revolves around how many pawns are remaining in the position. Now, let me ask a follow-up question. How many of you guys have read the book Amateur to IM by British Grandmaster, who was an IM at the time he wrote it, Jonathan Hawkins? Okay. Now, I don't believe we have that title on Chessable. Maybe we'll get it at some point. But I really like that book, especially for adult improvers, which I know a lot of you guys are, because he talks about the things that he did to go from like a decent amateur level to an international master as an adult. So it's really geared towards that demographic. And a huge portion of the book is about end games and also how to think about pawns as well. And keep that in mind as we go through this game. I'm going to be highlighting some key pawn themes here. So this is, again, the third game of the match between Wesley and Artemyev, still sticking with that. So Wesley has the white pieces. It's tied up, just 2 draws up to this point. And this was a Taimanov Sicilian. All right, so black playing knight c6. I have played this position from the black side quite a bit, although I usually play a6, which is, what variation is this? Yes, very good, Kang. And others, Chess Peter, Mouse Slip, Miras. This is the Khan variation. But the Taimanov is plenty theoretically acceptable as well. In fact, at the very highest level, I think they consider the Khan to be like slightly dubious. They don't play it too often, but so you're probably more likely to see the Taimanov when these top guns play each other. Now, you guys might know this if you play the white side of the open Sicilian, but a lot of the theoretically most critical lines that white can throw at black in the Sicilian involve white castling queenside. Okay, white castling queenside, black usually castling kingside, and we often get these sharp affairs where white will be pawn storming on the king side, black will be pawn storming on the queen side against white's king. And that's not always the narrative, but it's a very common one. And you see here, Wesley's going long. He's looking for the full point with the white pieces. Okay, f3. This is a precursor to g4. Also takes away this potential knight g4 move for black. Yeah, English attack-like structure, says Mouse Slip in the chat. Exactly. That's what this formation is known as, the English attack. So black gets on with his counterplay, b5. Here we go, g4. Knight takes d4, bishop takes. I'm not going to stress about the opening theory too much because I don't know it, for one thing. And it looks to me like they played a lot of theoretical moves here. Like, this is all book knowledge, I would have no doubt. King b1, you often see this move in Sicilians. White just kind of tucks the king away off of the c line. Always play king b1, says Richter's neighbor. Yeah. Black does castle. Here's h4. There you go, Sways. White does play h4. b4, counterattack on the knight. It's always a balancing act here, because if you're the side in one of these positions, you're either side, really, you want to be prosecuting your pawn storm. You want to be attacking and generally minimizing the number of moves that you play around your own king. But you can't go full reckless, right? Like, white's not just going to give up this knight. So even g5, you know, we can't justify g5 counterattacking because black takes c3 and they're hitting the queen. Black is creating too big of a threat. I definitely can't do that. So knight a4. Now d5. This gets really interesting. So Artemyev hits out in the center. Knight b6 was played, hitting the rook, which centralizes behind the pawn. e5. Now, this is a pretty cool move. And if I was really ambitious, I would pull up my database right now to check. But given that I'm doing this broadcast, I don't think I can. Be a little too difficult. But I wonder, okay, let's see. Why don't we run a quiz here? Now, there might be some honesty involved here because, yeah, some of you have certainly seen this game. We're not going to do a giveaway on this one, but let's see what you guys would play in this position as black. 1 minute quiz. Here we go. Black to move. What should black do? Oh, I see the people who have seen this game. They were in there immediately with their answers. I see you, Cappy Bar, JN, Zach, Kang, Roof Runner. Oh, shout out to the person who guessed queen takes c2. That is a true. Oh, that was you, Sways. Queen takes c2 is a truly unexpected move. Okay, couple seconds left here. All right, yes. So congratulations to many of you. You identify the move that Artemiev played. I mean, really pretty wild, but knight e4 was played. Move knight e4, jumping to the center. And again, I just only briefly saw this game and kind of tried to solidify in my head some of the major themes, but I assume tactically this is working. It's a sacrifice of the knight, but it opens this line, and I guess the whole point is white's going to have trouble getting out of this pin, and also with the semi-loose knight on the b6 square. The move bishop c5 definitely is lurking, along with e3. Yeah, we can't forget about e3, because e3 would open up the diagonal for the light square bishop. That's probably, like, if black got another move here, that's probably what black would do, I would imagine. Pawn e3. So Wesley sidesteps. He plays queen e2. Notice he goes to a light square here. He could play queen e3 and actually try to block, but I think he wanted to stay off the dark squares in anticipation of what's coming. Chess Peter says, this is most likely theory, right? Yeah, you know, it almost seems to me that that would be the case. We are on move 17 now. So I would be curious, though, if anyone knows if there have been games to reach this position. So queen e2, and now rook takes d4. And Artemiev gets two minor pieces for the rook. But because he sacrificed that knight initially, he's still down material, right? He's down in exchange. Does have one pawn to show for it, though. So rook d7, hitting the bishop on c5. Bishop g2, looking to round up that pawn on e4. Oh, thank you, Infinite Flash. Infinite Flash says it has been played in a game for today. Interesting. Okay. And Miras said preparation as well. Bishop d5. So two good bishops right here. A rook that's kind of stuck behind enemy lines. Bishop takes e4. And at this point, Artemiev was able to win the material back. He played queen c6. And I would bet that when Wesley put the rook in on d7, he maybe had this continuation in mind. He is going to have to sacrifice that rook now. Rook takes d5, pawn takes d5. Yeah, and this does look somewhat drawish, right? Because many of you know that when there's opposite color bishops present in the position, the drawish tendencies do increase. But if we're looking at this, if we're trying to figure out why one side or the other may have an advantage, is there anything you guys can point to? What is an imbalance maybe that we might be able to think about? There's a lot of play left here. White has a bit more space and maybe a kingside initiative, says Chess Peter. Capybar says black's pawn structure is worse. Makapaka also says pawn structure. Yeah, when I just cast my eye over this position, that's the thing that stands out to me. It seems like black's pawns are looser than white's pawns, especially the pawn on d5. Yes, I agree with that, Yali. That pawn on d5, I think, is going to cost black some resources in defense. White's already got the bishop aiming at it, so for all intents and purposes, the black queen needs to babysit that pawn as is. White has an easy move with rook d1 to further tie black down. Black's bishop can't ever help out in the defense of this pawn if it's on a light square. So these pawns also like could be loose in some cases, but the queen defends this one. I think the fact that the bishop's pointed at the pawn, also this one here, maybe gives white a little bit of something to work with. And I would bet if you were to load this in an engine, it would be a fairly substantial advantage for white, maybe like a +1 or a 1.5 or something. So we'll continue here. Queen e6, stepping out of the pin. Here comes rook d1, attacking the pawn. Rook d8. It's a tough call in these scenarios. Like d4 seems like a much safer move, right? But you see how that completely blocks the scope of this bishop, at least offensively. So I can see why Artemyev maybe didn't want to play that move. But that definitely looks a little more secure. Rook d8, e5, king h8. Okay, so Wesley's indicating he's going to pawn storm still. King h8 looks pretty odd to me. If you're playing black here, you'd love to play a5 and maybe start up your own attack. But I wonder if a5 runs into stuff like queen b5. I think this is maybe the difference in how these pawn storms are now shaping up. This causes some havoc here, and if white picks up the a5 pawn, let's say the rook on d8 is under attack. There's also the d5 pawn if the bishop moves. Queen b6 is capybar. Yeah, maybe. Although there's tricks, right? Like, can I even play? Ooh, I can almost play this move. I almost want to do it, hoping for back rank shenanigans, but this is not quite working for white. At minimum, though, maybe white can take and then bishop takes d5. Threatening bishop takes f7 if this bishop gets a little too aggressive. But actually, black might have drawing chances here. This is the type of thing you often see in these opposite color bishop positions. Trading down into an endgame, even down a pawn, is not necessarily fatal. So back to move 26 here. Just interesting to see Artemyev playing king h8 when, yeah, ideally you'd like to pawn storm. So he must not have liked that for some reason. But plays king h8. And now flashy move by Wesley, queen c4. Little haha, you can't take me. Because now this really would be leading to a back rank mate, right? Black would wish the king were back on g8 so he could safely play bishop f8. But in this case, all black can do is block and lose the pieces. So I'm going to guess that this was completely unexpected to Artemyev. How many of you guys watched the broadcast with the webcams? Because I noticed Artemyev's webcam was really dark. I caught it. I was at Starbucks, and my screen was a little bit obscured as well. I couldn't see so well, but he has a really dark webcam, so I couldn't really tell like what his emotions were. And I don't think he shows a lot of emotions too when he's playing. But I wonder if like this move caught him by surprise. Mr. Swift Tickle says, John at Starbucks? No way. All right. Queen c4, nice move. It's a double attack, and yeah, this pawn is a goner. Even still, yeah, okay, yeah, he doesn't take it, I guess, because if he does take it, maybe e5 will fall in the end. That's right, he played queen f4. d4. Bishop g4, hitting the queen. And now h5. So black did manage to save the d-pawn, but black is now getting pawn stormed again. And at this point, it's pretty clear that white's pawn storm is ahead of black's pawn storm. Bishop came to e7. Now, this is tricky in terms of how white should best execute their coming pawn push here, because a lot of times when you're pawn storming the enemy king, you want to try to break and attack two different pawns or two different points if possible to try to force through lines. But interestingly here, Wesley plays h6. He advances on the dark squares. And that was probably due to a couple things. Like one, maybe the fact that black has a dark square bishop. So he's trying to restrict that bishop, even thinking about the endgame. Yeah, really h6 instead of g6. Yeah, I know. Usually g6 would be the move in these positions. Again, it's like levering lines open by force, but he must not have liked it for some reason. Maybe a possible trade once and then an h6 type move. Although this pawn on g6 is formidable. It's going to create some problems for black. But yeah, watch how this unfolds. He plays h6, and Artemyev decides to take. Play g6 instead if he wants to try to keep things more closed. But I'm going to bet if g6, probably the move e6 is annoying. which blocks the black queen from guarding f7. And on pawn takes, come in here, double attack, even a triple attack with bishop takes e6 in the mate being a threat. This looks pretty much losing for black. Bishop f8 to guard the mate, bishop takes e6, threatening queen g8, threatening the queen. Danilov says, what if rook f8 after e6? Yeah, that's probably a better move. Rook f8. Yep. I could take. I'm even tempted to play rook f1 to try to get some cheeky thing like this going on, where we sack the queen in checkmate. But definitely a point of analysis, like what happens if black plays g6 instead. Again, I'm not using the engine. These are just my base thoughts. But Artemiev took. So we get this swap, and now rook g8. The rook tries to occupy an open file. And here comes the e6 move once again. And this invasion that I just mentioned, this idea. Yeah, it doesn't play rook takes d4. Cappy bar. Let's run a little quick quiz. We're gonna make this a 30-second quiz. Okay, if rook takes d4 is played, what will be? Oh, okay. Again, I think I did it for the wrong color. Let me cancel that. I don't know how to run a quiz if it's like if it didn't happen in the game. I'm pretty sure there's a way, but I'll have to ask Luciana later. But anyways, if rook takes d4, what's going to be the answer from black? Actually, now that I think about it, it's trickier than I thought. Yeah, maybe rook takes d4 works, actually. Because there is no back rank, right? Because, okay, if you go queen h1, white can block. White can play bishop d1. That would probably be safest. But also if rook takes g4, which is what I was thinking might work, queen takes g4, now queen h1, because I was like, oh, there's no bishop, but white can still block anyways. So maybe there is nothing wrong with rook takes d4. Interesting. Yeah, this might be a point we'd have to check with the engine. But it's possible Wesley just liked the e6 move even more and decided not to go for this. So, yeah, he played e6 instead, which is a pretty attractive idea. Again, it blocks the black queen from guarding f7. So f takes e. Now queen f7, invading. And this hits the bishop. And this h-pawn is starting to really flex its muscles because that creates just a ton of back rank issues for black. Rook takes g4 could be tried here, but I believe just queen takes e7 then, and white's threatening mate in 2. Queen f8, rook g8, queen f6. Yeah, this pawn is looking muscular. I agree. So these top guys love to establish pawns on the 3rd or the 6th rank when attacking. Like Kasparov did this all the time when he was world champion. I've seen so many Sicilian games. Kasparov on the black side of the Sicilian where he shoves a pawn down there. Like even on the king side sometimes in the Sicilian, like putting a pawn all the way down on h3. So after queen f7, black played queen g5, trying to strengthen the defense on the g file, but now queen takes e6. It doesn't even take with the bishop, takes with the queen instead. If queen takes on g4, then queen e5 is devastating, again, because of this pawn controlling g7. So Artemiev played rook g6, queen f8 check, or queen c8 rather. Queen c7, attacking the bishop again. So if this, Queen e5 is still an issue, but just keep an eye on this. Bishop f6. Now bishop e6. Yeah, and opposite color bishops tend to favor the attacking player. And we're really seeing that here. Rook f8. Queen d6, hit the rook again. Black eliminates this pawn, but loses the b pawn. And after all this excitement, it's still equal material, but black's pawns remain weak. And black's king looks a little bit weaker too. All right, Artemiev plays d3, looking to sacrifice a pawn to open some lines. Definitely trying to open this dark square bishop towards the white king. And real instructive move right here. Wesley plays c3. Doesn't even take the pawn. Because he could play c takes d3 here. But he deems it better to play c3 and establish two connected pawns on the same diagonal as black's bishop. So that caught my eye when I was scrolling through this. Bishop back to g7. Bishop c4, so he's going to attack that pawn. And black does have it down all the way on the second rank now. So you got to be pretty confident that that pawn's going nowhere. Now bishop d3, a little bit of a rearrangement. White kind of buttoning everything up here, defending the bishop. Rook d8 attacking the bishop, and now bishop takes a6, grabs another pawn. I mean, optically, this looks kind of scary for white for sure. But black does not have queen e4 because of white's queen covering. And white's got a blockade going on here. And Wesley's basically saying, I'm going to try to win with these three pawns later on. So queen f3. Yeah, and now this allowed rook takes d2. And white was able to eliminate that pawn. So I would bet that time pressure was starting to kick in here. These games were 15 minutes with a 10-second increment. But I don't know. Queen f3 does not seem quite right. Just on sight, I would consider getting this bishop onto a different diagonal, like maybe bishop h6, maybe to reinforce. Leaves the king open, but then again, d4 is covered. Jan Zach, says it was time pressure. That makes sense. I mean, we're pretty deep in this game. This is move 45 when black played queen f3. Someone was asking about queen e1. Yeah, queen e1 is definitely possible, although it doesn't threaten anything. You know, like black could get another move here, and white's got this on lockdown. So I wonder if Wesley would just start moving a pawn or something. Bishop f8 is another suggestion. Yeah, bishop f8 makes some sense as well. I think definitely trying to relocate this bishop is what I would do. I mean, again, bishop h6 to me, just to have a backup to the pawn on d2 with the weakest piece on the board of the remaining black pieces. That would be kind of nice. But queen f3 played, and Wesley was able to get rid of that pawn and also trade rooks in the process. Game is still far from over, though. Queen d5 check. Let's forks this and this. King c2. Now queen takes a2. And interesting moment here because queen b8 looks like it decides the game. Bishop f8, queen takes b8. But black has the very long range move, queen g8 in reply, right? And now Yali says bishop c4 first. Oh, you mean in this position, Yali? Okay, white could try that. The bishop was under attack, although actually that wasn't even a threat because of the queen b8 move. But I guess black plays maybe queen a8 here and avoids the back rank check. Yeah, because the virtue of Wesley's idea, queen b8 check, is that after this, queen g8 forced, only move to keep black in the game, take. We have this endgame, opposite color bishop endgame, but two pawns against one, white having connected pawns. Now, we're going to make this a giveaway, again, for a mug shirt or the all-valuable Chessable course of your choice. I'm not going to make this a quiz because this is more of a conceptual question, and this is the main reason I wanted to show this game. Who can describe white's winning strategy here? If white wants to play for a win, And I know this is hard to do in chat, but if you were to describe it in a sentence or two, I'm going to choose the best answer. And I'll give you guys, a minute or so to compose your answer. What is your winning strategy as white? Maybe outline a key point or two. Okay. Some good answers coming in here. Very nice, Red Lucy. My plan is to get the 100 endgames course, so I know how to win this. Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, a lot of good answers here. Give it a few more seconds. Okay. So I'm going to give the prize to Infinite Flash. I liked Infinite Flash's answer. It says white needs to push his pawns on dark squares. Yeah, dark squares. Keeping them connected on dark squares as much as possible. Said B4, C4, C5. Yeah, that's good technique. Like that. Bring the king up to support the pawn, says Infinite Flash, and thereby try to continue pushing the pawns on dark squares. So, yeah, congratulations, Infinite Flash. Other good answers, too. That was just one of the most thorough ones I saw here. Of course, we have to address the black pawn, but white's bishop can do that from like a long diagonal, for instance. This is very similar to the endgame from MVL versus Grishuk during the candidates. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that was the same color bishop ending, I think. But definitely some similar themes, like the pawns involved. Sure thing, Infinite Flash. Good answer. Yeah, thanks again for writing all that, guys. Let's give a prize to Chess Peter as well. They said pretty quickly, advance pawns and protect them on dark squares. And that's one of the main things I was looking for. Key thing is the dark squares. A lot of people make a mistake of trying to put the pawns on the same color as their bishop in this type of ending. But that creates a prime situation for a blockade for the defensive side. So I'll be able to show that coming up. So yeah, I like that you guys highlighted the dark square thing in particular. So Wesley plays B4 straight away. And I think this is a theoretical win. I could run this through the... In fact, let me do that. Should hit the table base, right? How many pieces do we have? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Yeah. So this will hit the 7-man table base. I'm just going to verify right when we get into this ending if this is a win. I'm pretty certain it is. Yep, this is winning. So the table base, which is a large set of solved positions, every position in chess with 7 pieces or less, and I think also 8 pieces or less, has been figured out. And you can look it up, and it'll show you exactly what the result will be on various moves. So it's a very handy tool. So, yep, it does indicate that this is winning for white. There are 6 different wins, 6 different moves, rather, that win the game for white, that don't throw it away. Interestingly, the move B3 throws it away, though. So if you're going to advance a pawn, you got to play B4 or C4, but not B3. Oh, just 7 for now? I never remember if they're on 7 or 8 chess developers, if they've made it to 8-man table bases. But Wesley plays one of the winning moves, B4. King F7. Here comes C4, getting those pawns up and going ASAP. Now again, C5. So he is not putting these on light squares. He's connecting them on dark squares, right? So let's say white were to play B5. What would be the most secure move here for black? Black to move and draw the game. Good. A lot of bishop d4 is rolling in. Yeah, that's what I was thinking as well. Might be other drawing moves too. You see how bishop d4 immediately halts the progress of these two pawns by blockading them on dark squares. And white has everything committed to light squares, even their king in this instance. White's not going to get anywhere. Black can move their king over, for instance, to the b6 square, stick the bishop somewhere where it guards c5, and white will never, ever, ever win this position. Black doesn't even care about their h-pawn. They can give white the h-pawn. Doesn't matter. Just to show how this might go. Black can just make a beeline for the b6 square. It'll give white the pawn. Who cares? But as long as black remains in touch with these two key squares, b6 and c5, this is an unbreakable fortress. Just don't hang the bishop and don't move that bishop from those squares. Black could even go this way if they wanted, right? If they safely play on this diagonal. So these guys all know that, but I want you guys to be able to ingrain this sort of pattern in your head. Just have it be second nature. So Wesley played c5 instead of b5, preserving the win. Yeah, sure thing, Mr. Swift Tickle. Bishop f8. Okay, so good possible defense. Black is trying to slow down the progress of these pawns. Since now b5 would be met by takes, right? So Wesley plays bishop b7. I like that move a lot. Gets the bishop on this diagonal just in case this pawn starts pushing, and it denies black an important square. Okay, king e5. Black tries to push up the board. And I think we got to add that white king soon, huh? So king d3. Black plays h5 and king c4. Here we go. h4, might as well push. Black doesn't have a whole lot else to do. And of course, many of you understand this, but it is worth saying, if black were to sacrifice their bishop for just one pawn in this situation, they're never going to draw it. You know, unless they could win this pawn, or unless it was a rook pawn with the wrong color bishop. So, you know, if this were an h pawn and white had this light square bishop, this would be a draw because black could go hide in the dark square corner and white would never be able to get them out. But that's not a case we have here. If black's going to give up their bishop and hope to draw, they got to be winning both pawns. So h5, king c4, h4, and you probably know what's coming next. First, he plays bishop c8, guarding against h3. But white's going to continue pushing here. Good technique. b5, king guarding this pawn, looking to advance on these dark squares still, avoiding a blockade. So king e7, b6, king d8. Now, resist the temptation to play a move like b7. I know it's tempting. I played positions like this out against many of my students in the past, and they have a real hard time believing moves like that are not good, right? Because it looks correct. You get the pawn one square closer for promotion, the bishop's defended, but you're going to blow the win. King c7, this is another blockade for black. Draw. Again, if something like this, all black has to do is just control those dark squares, c7 and b8. It looks super impressive. Black can just slot in with the king, bishop back to c7. White's never going to crack this fortress. Sways is very honest, says, I would have done that. Yeah, many of you would. Absolutely. I've done stuff like this too. Even as a master, like just playing blitz and stuff, just made the wrong move in a scenario like that. Back pawn move matters. So king d8. Wesley just backed the bishop up, played bishop all the way back to h3. All right. I'm tempted to do one more giveaway here. Okay. Yeah, let's do one more giveaway where someone writes in the chat what their plan is from this point. And yeah, white to move. What is the winning plan from here? Try to be a little more specific this time. You don't have to give exact moves, but where do you want your pieces specifically? Let me put it this way. Where should the white king go? And where will your pawns be? Oh, a lot of you guys are getting this. Good, good. I think a lot more people are confident now that we've discussed this a little bit. This is going to be hard to even give away a prize. Let me see, though. Dortmund says, I had this draw one on my third OTB game 5 years ago from the up 2 pawn side. Oh, yeah, it's heartbreaking, right? When you're up the material and you can't convert it because they got a blockade. Awesome. Yeah, a lot of you got it right. Just giving a few more seconds here if anyone wants to submit a final answer. Very good. Mm-hmm. Okay, we're gonna give the prize to. Sorry, this is hard to do. There's so many decent answers. Yeah, we're gonna give it to Sprink, Sprinc. They had it right. Yeah, king to b7 and play c7, basically. Just got to keep it all on protected squares. So Sprink, congratulations. You get a mug, a shirt, or a Chessable course. But thanks to everyone for mentioning your answers. This is pretty much unstoppable, right? And I don't think in this case the move order matters much. Like you could play king b5 right away. Look how white has a barrier. All these squares are taken away thanks to this awesome bishop especially, but also the pawn being on a dark square and controlling a dark square. This black king can't really approach further. So you could play king b5. You could play c6 like Wesley did. This creates an immediate threat of c7 check coming in right with the bishop. So pretty much forces Artemyev's next move, bishop f4. And now white walks in. And it's just important to have visualized where you want the king to best escort those pawns. And that's the b7 square. That's where c7 will be protected twice by the b pawn, but especially by the king. So black can't sacrifice the bishop for the two remaining pawns. And just to put yourself in Wesley's shoes, he knows that setup back many moves. He's probably known this for a long, long time in his chess career, but that is intuitive to him, and that's why he was pushing the pawns on dark squares. Even playing precise moves like bishop c8 and moving the bishop back, creating this wall. He knows that the king coming to b7 with the c pawn getting pushed is inevitable. Yeah, probably Tabias. He says he knew it before queen takes g8. Exactly. Because when determining whether to trade queens there, that's a big factor if you know you're going to win that endgame or not. And just the exact setup, how to execute it, is going to vary based on how black defended a little bit. This is the game now. King b7. b5 played, but after c7 check, Artemyev threw in the towel, resigned the game. One of the pawns will promote. Take, c8 coming. So instructive endgame right there with some bishop ending technique. You can see the black h pawn was basically a non-factor here, which is one of the main reasons white's winning this endgame. Sometimes these endgames are draws, though. Like, just to point this out, if we began this endgame with black's king in a better position, that definitely increases the chance of a draw. And in 100 endgames, De La Via shows some positions comparing like slightly different scenarios, but like a good setup for black, if they could achieve it, would be black king on b6, black bishop on this diagonal, guarding the c5 square. So trying to ensure that if ever c5 is played, that black can sacrifice for it. But black really needs the king closer to have a chance here. Okay, so fascinating game. Good pawn play by Wesley. And yeah, it seems like a lot of this was theory, but pretty fascinating nonetheless. Good game there. I like that one a lot. Now, yeah, this was the last game. Artemyev as white versus Wesley. He had to try to win, but it did end in a draw. We're not going to go over this game, but Artemyev did try the Jobava London. Anybody play this line? Simon Williams is a big proponent of this. He's played it a lot on his YouTube channel, and he has a course on Chessable on it as well. But yeah, this is one of these like systems that I said Artemyev, he's really good at dabbling in these sort of things, but he didn't really get much this game. Wesley did a little interesting like bishop g4 and then back to d7 type thing. Yeah, we're not going to analyze this in detail. Artemyev castled queenside, but Wesley just looks super solid here. Ended up castling kingside, but compared to the last game, there is really no hint of a pawn storm for white. This is too well blockaded. Black's got the knight pair versus the bishop pair, but yeah, Black is very well entrenched here. White's pawns also look a little messy. Sometimes White takes on the double isolated pawns in this opening, but not liking it here. I'm going to trade on h5, but White had to give up the bishop pair in the process. I think with this knight coming to f5, this and this, Wesley probably knew he always had this under control. So this was the final position where they repeated. Very well centralized with the queen hitting the pawn, and draw agreed. So Wesley wins today's matchup against Artemyev, but they will play tomorrow. Now, we focused heavily on this match, but we got a little bit of time remaining. Why don't I maybe go to the other match? This was a slugfest. Aronian versus Lei Kwang Liem in this matchup. So I'm not going to go through any single game in this match in great detail. Maybe I'll just show you guys a few positions that stood out to me. They had this line a couple times. This game was Aronian as white, Lei Kwang Liem as black. I have a feeling this is some like relatively fashionable stuff at the moment. So in this two knights or Gioco Pianissimo, however you want to describe it based on the move order, White playing this very early bishop g5. I've been seeing more and more of this, which is kind of funny because those of you who have played scholastic chess and maybe grew up playing tournaments as a kid, I swear I saw so many games and participated in so many games where some variation of like this happened. How many of you guys have had this? I think this is like a rite of passage for a scholastic player or an improving player. Like, just symmetrical position out of e4, e5. The knights developed all the conventional squares, pins going on, and then one side trying to get the jump on the other, specifically with a pin against a knight here. Yali says most boring position. Yeah. This usually benefits the player who gets the jump, the first jump here. So White in this case. But these guys don't play like that, of course. So when Aronian played bishop g5, Lei Kwang Liem played h6 and kicked the bishop right away. Bishop h4, trying to maintain the pin, d6, and then Aronian put the pawn on c3. And that is how they tend to play it versus knight c3. They like pawn c3 because it gives White more leverage with moves like d4 or b4 in the middle game. I think this is the game where there was like an interesting sacrifice. Aronian did this in a couple of his white games here against Lei Kwang. Yeah, Lei Kwang Liem aggressively playing on the king side with these pawns, leaving his king in the middle for now. Some maneuvers. This seemed to be working out well for White after this trade occurred on e3. It struck me as maybe a consequential decision because Black generally would not like to give up the bishop for the knight here, but the knight jumping into one of these squares probably scared Lei Kwang. So he played bishop takes e3. Now f takes e3, and now Aronian's going to send his rook back to the f file to attack f7. Yeah, and this is the move I wanted to highlight. He played rook f5 here. Really interesting. Offering the exchange, but if Black takes him up on it, bishop takes f5, e takes f5, knight takes h4 can't be played because White has this backed up by the queen and the bishop. So you'd have to play knight h8 if you want to save the knight. And what do you guys think would be the follow-up square for white? Or, yeah, roll safe, just mentioned it. Yeah, it seems like knight e4 would be the move. But even pawn e4 does look good, too. But yeah, knight e4 looks pretty juicy for white, with ideas like f6 and then trying to like wedge the queen in somehow. This definitely doesn't impress for black, especially that knight on h8. Yeah, pawn e4 also kind of compelling. Although pawn e4, maybe knight a5, trying to track down the bishop. I think white would like to keep that light square bishop if possible. Maybe knight e4, knight a5 as well. Something to analyze, at least, if you want to play through this with the engine a little bit. But at any rate, like Huang did not take the rook on f5. He played king g7. And yeah, it looked like white was kind of well in control here. But later, this rook does come under fire. Yeah, this is an interesting sequence right here. So at this stage, like Huang played knight e7, allows rook takes h5 to be played, but then queen f7 hitting the rook. And the rook has no safe squares. He's overextended here a little bit. Has to go to f5. And this is a little bit different than before because white doesn't have that light square bishop on this diagonal, which was like pinning the pawn. It just got wild. Like, I have no idea what was going on here. This whole game was pretty crazy from this point forward from what I saw. I'm tempted to do one more giveaway. But let's just we'll make it a regular quiz because I think I exhausted my giveaway powers for this stream. I believe there was a move that Aronian missed coming up. Aronia is now down in exchange, but black's king is very sketchy. Okay, right here. We're going to make this a little quiz. Black to move. What should black do? And I'm going to make this a 2-move sequence. There we go. Find the best 2-move sequence for black. I say best, but again, I haven't looked at this with the engine. It looked very good to me, though. Okay. Answers rolling in. Got 15 seconds left. 2-move sequence. Oh, Yali. Was that a mouse slip, Yali? I saw Yali putting in rook g3. I assume that was a mouse slip. Okay, we got our results. Nice. Okay. Fair amount of you got this one correct. Yeah, complicated position. I didn't give you hardly any time to think about this. But Lei Kwang did, in fact, play the move rook takes g2. Yeah, little deflection idea. So if queen takes g2, then queen takes d1 check is coming. So the second move you had to find, king h1, was the move rook h2. Yeah, this is really impressive. That way, if the bishop takes, which it did, then e2 is played. And the point here is that the bishop is not on f4, so there's no bishop takes d2. Now if rook takes d2, again, as played, e1 equals queen with check. And then black picked up this rook. And the game was still wild from here. But black just simplified the position a little bit. So I just thought that was a really cool sequence. Again, something that we would definitely want to cross-reference with the engine. Zootnote asks, does rook f2 work after king h1? Rook f2, interesting. Well, checks are at a premium here, so I would think on rook f2, probably bishop h6 is going to be the issue. Because if this white queen can get loose with check and then rook takes d2, white should be winning. And I think that's going to work because just process of elimination, right? Like king f7 or king g8 allow checks on light squares in either case. Yeah, king e8 also would allow queen h5 or even queen e4, and king e7 also allows queen e4, and this will fall. So in sharp positions like this, checks are at a premium for sure. Like he or she who can check often controls the pace of the game. So really nicely spotted by Lei Kwang. But speaking of checks, like Baronian kept fighting. He played bishop c5, and this game eventually ended in a draw. Check. You can see black's king safety is pretty questionable. Check. In fact, maybe, yeah, white's the one fighting for the win now. Yeah. At some point, bishop d4 was played, threatening a mate on g7. Black came back. Black does not check. Really unclear who was fighting for a win at this point. I think even the commentators were confused as to who was better here. Pawn got captured with check. Bear in mind, time is an issue too. They're only 15-minute games. Yeah, and now finally the players called it a draw with black this time going for the perpetual. So really wild game. You can check that out if you want. We're kind of towards our end here, but let me just see if there's anything else I want to highlight from these games. Yeah, congrats to Lei Kwang. He did win this match 3-1. So he will have a lead going into tomorrow against Aronian. This one was kind of like a reversed Queen's Gambit accepted. Lei Kwang was white, Aronian black. Modest like opening from Lei Kwang, but when Aronian played c5, he decided to take on c5, and they played a QGA in reverse. In this game, it looked to me like Lei Kwang was actually able to maintain a pawn advantage pretty deep in this one. And there was a moment where the pawn actually was returned. But with equal material, his knights did a lot of work. He really pulled off some knight wizardry in this game. Let me see if I can make one more quiz here. Remember properly. Was it here? Yeah, I think this is probably not too difficult of a quiz. Yeah, he just ended up pushing the c-pawn and basically costing Aronian a piece to defend against the c-pawn promoting. Lei Kwang moving to the U.S. If I'm not mistaken, he is actually the coach at Webster University, which is where Susan Polgar used to coach. She retired, as I understand, and I'm pretty sure Lei Kwang is now the coach. But please don't quote me on that. I think that's just what I remember. Probably someone in the chat can confirm. But yeah, he ended up winning a piece for a pawn here. And okay, I think I know what I can show. Another little endgame quiz for you guys. Yeah, Levon is also apparently transferring his federation to US. Yeah, okay, right here. This was kind of nice, I thought. So even though white has a piece for a pawn, it's still tricky to win because you got to preserve some pawns if you're white here. You want to preserve at least a pawn or two if possible. And black has a structure that complements this dark square bishop. So what Lei Kwang did is he played knight g5, attacking f7. He's really trying to get at the base of that pawn chain, right? And f6 is not going to work. That forks the knights, but it runs into knight takes g6 check. So black played f5 instead. Now this knight just came back. Doesn't even take right away. Probably didn't want to have to lose this pawn, but played this knight back and succeeded in blockading all black's pawns and had created a weakness, multiple weaknesses now where both of these pawns are weak. Move it around a little bit more. Have taken g6 here, maybe. But he's being very careful not to trade off, not even to give black a hint of being able to trade off certain pawns. A lot of knight moves. Black plays g5 here, knight g4 check, forces the king away from guarding this pawn. So white can play f takes g5. Yeah, and finally got a configuration where I believe at this point he's going to cleanly win one of the pawns. The black pushed there, but this was the beginning of the end, and yeah, Aronian lost pretty quickly. E6, nice move. If king takes g4, this pawn runs through. And black resigned. Pawn takes f4, e takes f4, easy win. Can you mate with two knights? So you can mate with two knights, king and two knights against king, but the problem is it's not forced. The defensive side does not have to blunder into checkmate. So for all intents and purposes, no, that endgame is a draw. Now, some of you might know that with king and two knights against king and pawn, there are some positions that are winning for the side with the two knights by force. That's interesting, right? So with the addition of a pawn for the defensive side, there are some positions that are winning if the pawn is blockaded far back enough. If you're interested, it's the Trowitsky End Game. So you can, I'll type that in the chat. Or Trowitsky line. Feel free to look that up if you're ever interested in knowing the nuances of that theory. If you're ever in that side as the defensive side and you have a pawn against your opponent's two knights, and that's the only material that's left on the board along with the kings, of course, try to push your pawn as far as possible and actually just try to give away the pawn. If you give away the pawn, you will draw, provided you don't make some catastrophic blunder and go to the corner when you're not forced to. So just a little aside. Okay, I think I got to wrap this up. Let me show you just one last position. So Lequang won that game. I'm going to show you one more. We'll just make it one last little quiz, in fact. Final game. We're skipping over a pretty interesting game, actually, where Aronian miraculously held a draw and ended with Rook versus Bishop. Okay, final quiz for the road. This is the final game. Lequang as white once again against Aronian. He was already leading here. But white to move. What should white do? Oh, this is satisfying. I see all the correct answers rolling in pretty much immediately. Makapaka, though, I got to call you out, Makapaka. Makapaka says mouse slip. They're the only one who has not got it correct so far. I will believe you that that was a mouse slip. If you get it wrong, no worries. It's a complicated position. I threw you into a very messy position with limited time. Dortembor says, I mouse slipped H4. All right. Yeah, so in this position, Lequang, it's a messy position where white's dead winning, but Lequang did indeed play the move Queen G8 to decide the game, forcing an elegant checkmate. So Aronian resigned here, but the rook is backing up the queen, so rook takes G8 would be forced, and then you have your choice of which way to checkmate. Whichever rook you want. So, yeah, exciting match. Wish we had more time to cover some of the games in this match, but I really wanted to look at that Wesley game because I think there were some salient points there that were like easily digestible for many of you, especially the point about advancing your pawns in a way that complements your bishop, especially keeping the pawns on opposite colors to your bishop. Yeah, no prize for this one. I exhausted my prizes, unfortunately. So, okay. Well, thank you all for tuning in. This was a lot of fun. Yeah, the little over an hour that we had together flew by. So, thanks again for everyone who joined this. And there will be more of these. I think there's at least 1 or 2 more of these. I'm trying to follow up Vladimir Kramnik, Peter Svidler, Andras Toth as well, if you know him. I saw he did a Chessable classroom too. So yeah, thanks again. Check out the Chessable Twitch channel.
Thank you so much, John.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks, everyone. And I'll see you guys again, hopefully in the near future. All right, take care, everyone. Bye.
Goodbye. Love you.